Good evening from New York. I'm Chris Hayes. There is, of course, an old cliche in politics. It's not the crime, it's the cover-up. It's commonly used to refer to the Watergate scandal, where, of course, then President Richard Nixon was reluctant to hand over his secret Oval Office recordings. And then when he did, he was ordered by the Supreme Court to do so. There were 18 minutes of tape missing. And that was from a conversation just 3 days after the break-in at Watergate. Nixon tried to blame his secretary for the mistake, but the seemingly flagrant attempt to cover it up was ultimately what led to Nixon's downfall. We also saw a kind of bizarre reversal of the cliche during Hillary Clinton's 2016 campaign for president, where Clinton was accused of a cover-up using a private email server and allegedly destroying communications, an accusation that became a refrain at Trump's rallies. But the thing was that the underlying crime that she was supposedly covering up was never really substantiated and barely even alleged. It was just sort of this vague implication of wrongdoing. But during the campaigns and presidency of Donald Trump, things were different, of course. Trump's brazen lawlessness happened out in the open, which bizarrely worked as a kind of excuse or justification, as if the brazenness itself is its own form of scandal insulation. I mean, think about Trump's infamous Russia, if you're listening moment during the summer of 2016, when he just called on a foreign adversary to illegally hack Hillary Clinton's emails. That happened during a live press conference in Florida. And back in September 2019, it was the White House itself that released the notes from the so-called perfect phone call with the Ukrainian president, where Trump pressured him to dig up dirt on the Bidens, leading to the former president's first impeachment. And when Trump realized the transcript might not be so perfect after all, his defense was to do the same thing again, only this time in public.
Mr. President, what exactly did you hope Zelensky would do about the Bidens after your phone call? Exactly.
Well, I would think that if they were honest about it, they'd start a major investigation into the Bidens. It's a very simple answer. They should investigate the Bidens, because how does a company that's newly formed, and all these companies, if you look at, and by the way, likewise, China should start an investigation into the Bidens, because what happened in China is just about as bad as what happened with Ukraine.
Because again, you see what he's doing there, right? He had kind of been caught in this phone call doing something untoward. And his first instinct was to reverse engineer a kind of brazenness about it by going in front of the cameras and then doing the crimes in public. It's like when he pressured Mike Pence to help commit a coup on Twitter. And when that was doomed to fail, he riled up an angry mob and sent them to storm the Capitol. Again, all on camera. But as we've learned over the years, and as we're learning more now, not all of Trump's malfeasance was committed out in the open. As it turns out, there were apparently many cover-ups. Like when Trump instructed his personal lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, to pitch the Department of Homeland Security on the federal government seizing the voting machines as part of an attempt to steal the election. Sending Giuliani, of course, kept his hands clean. And in fact, Politico just published emails indicating that Giuliani, along with disgraced former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn, were also working with others behind the scenes on a clandestine plot to seize the voting machines, including drafting a potential executive order. Again, that stuff wasn't being done out in public. It's lucky we even have those records at all, because every day we are also learning more about the efforts that Trump and his team took to destroy evidence. About as clear an example of a cover-up as you could hope to get. It all started with Trump's much reported habit of ripping up documents, which would be a clear and flagrant violation of the Presidential Records Act. We now know that many of the records received by the National Archives reportedly arrived shredded, had to be taped back together, and that is if they arrived at all, because some records were apparently destroyed completely, directed into so-called burn bags, which is just a flagrant violation of the act. Others were reportedly hidden away at the ex-president's private residence in Florida, including, it turns out, those were marked classified, including some marked top secret, according to the Washington Post. Top secret, of course, is just, written across the top. It looks a lot like it does in the movies. We now know the National Archives has asked the Department of Justice to investigate these practices. But today, we learned about another way that the ex-president was apparently destroying documents. And it might actually answer one of the long-standing mysteries of the Trump administration. It's one that I thought about probably more than I should have. Because, you see, during many of his campaign-style rallies, Donald Trump Always a showman at heart, would sometimes practice what could only be described as his stand-up routine. He had material, and he'd go to it again and again. And the motivation behind his shtick was usually pretty obvious. For instance, he used to riff that wind turbines cause cancer, which they did not, because he was feuding with a wind farm he thought ruined the views of his golf course in Scotland. There was one particular riff that never really made much sense. And it was a riff about environmentally friendly showers and toilets that use less water. The crowd absolutely loved it. He went back to it again and again. Just listen.
So, I hate to say the three things. It's the shower, it's the sink, and you know the third element in the bathroom. But I don't say it, because every time I say it, they only talk about that one. Because it's sort of gross to talk about, right? So I won't talk about the fact that people have to flush their toilet 15 times. Okay? I will not talk about it. Sinks, right? Showers. And what goes with a sink and a shower? 10 times, right? 10 times. Well, Bob, not me, of course, not me. People are flushing toilets 10 times, 15 times, as opposed to once. We won't talk about toilets, but you know that's 10, 15, but we don't talk about that. Because I've said this 3 or 4 times, the only subject they ever talk about is toilets.
Wait, first of all, credit where due. It is a funny bit. Second of all, they're flushing toilets 10, 15 times, okay? Not 3 times, not 4 times, 10 or 15 times. I mean, you look at it, you think like, is the guy well? Is there something going on? Should he be going to Walter Reed to get that checked out? What is he talking about? No one could figure out what Trump was talking about. 15 times? Well, today we might have an answer. According to a new nugget from New York Times' Maggie Haberman's upcoming book, which comes out actually in the fall, while President Trump was in office, staff in the White House residence periodically discovered wads of printed paper clogging a toilet and believed the president had flushed pieces of paper. At least according to this report, staff believed that the president of the United States, the commander-in-chief, Donald J. Trump, was personally flushing documents down the toilet, ripping them up, flushing them down the toilet. At the very least, 10 to 15 flushes starts to make some sense. I mean, I've never disposed of documents that way, but I can imagine, particularly with those efficient toilets, it could be a while. Oh, we should note that Trump has denied the allegations for what that's worth. Writing one of the statements, he's forced release now because he's banned from Twitter, quote, "Another fake story that I flushed papers and documents down a White House toilet is categorically untrue and simply made up by a reporter in order to get publicity for a mostly fictitious book." But it's been widely reported that Trump has a habit of destroying documents, ripping them up, apparently designating them for burn bags, maybe perhaps even flushing them. And I think it's true the lesson he learned is never leave anything in writing. And there's always, again, to go back to the brazenness, right? There's always this kind of exculpatory air that hangs over him because he's like so clearly such a moral idiot who doesn't know like what's right and what's wrong, that there's something exculpatory about the fact that he ripped everything up. Like that was their spin. Like, oh, it's just habit. He's like a paper ripper. But flushing records down the toilet? You do that out of habit? Just absentmindedly there 15 times? Or even destroying them? Okay, that's just flagrantly unlawful in a way that people in the White House should understand. Trump apparently thought he could flush away the evidence. And the guilty conscience embedded that implies is so incredibly telling. In November of 2020, South Carolinians elected their first Republican woman to Congress ever. Her name is Nancy Mace. She's got a fascinating story. She dropped out of high school at age 17. She went on to earn her high school diploma. She then graduated magna cum laude from the Citadel, the military college of South Carolina, a storied institution. She was the school's first female to graduate from its Corps of Cadets. And Mace represents a purple district. It was represented by a Democrat before her. And so her first term has been a real roller coaster as she tries to navigate representing the party of Trump. For example, in the days after the January 6th insurrection, she's new to Congress, by the way, Mace voted against impeaching Trump, but was still openly critical of her party's leader.
We were really trying hard to figure out how do we hold a president accountable that put all of our lives at risk. And this was a traumatic event for many members of Congress. And I believe in the days, weeks, and months to come, as we learn more, the worse it's going to get.
And just a few weeks after making those comments about the danger of January 6th, Mace was feuding with Democratic Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, disingenuously accusing her of playing up the danger on January 6th to make it seem worse than it was. And this fall, Mace had a sort of interesting vote on the pro-democracy side of the ledger as one of only 9 House Republicans who voted to hold former Trump advisor Steve Bannon in contempt for refusing to cooperate with the January 6th committee. Mace has tried to carve out what I think is an impossible space, right? She's not a full MAGA sycophant, but she's also not in the Cheney, Kinzinger kind of full never Trumper. And as I said on the show over and over, you're either for democracy or you are pro-coup. And in Trump's eyes, Nancy Mace was on the wrong side. So yesterday he endorsed her primary opponent, saying, quote, Katie Arrington is running against an absolutely terrible candidate, Congresswoman Nancy Mace, whose remarks and attitude have been devastating for her community and not at all representative of the Republican Party, to which she has been very disloyal. I should note the woman he endorsed just resigned from her position at the Pentagon after she was placed on administrative leave, and her security clearance was suspended due to a probe into allegations she released classified information without authorization. And because you cannot be pro-democracy and be on Team Trump, today Congresswoman Mace tried to make things right with the boss.
Hey everyone, Congresswoman Nancy Mace here. I'm in front of Trump Tower today, and I remember in 2015 when President Trump announced his run. I was one of his earliest supporters. I supported him again in 2020 because of policies I believed in. He brought American jobs back. He lowered our taxes, wages, and employment were better for every hardworking American in our country. He made America safer, and he took on China directly. And America was stronger all around the world. And quite frankly, freedom and democracy was stronger all around the world.
There's a lot there that's debatable or not even true. But as pathetic as that performance is, I fear for the Congresswoman, it won't be pathetic enough. Katie Edmondson is a congressional reporter for the New York Times. Last year, she wrote an article on how Nancy Mace called herself a new voice for the Republican Party and then pivoted, and she joins me now. Katie, you've been doing some reporting on Mace. She really is, to me, in a pretty unique position and has tried to carve out a fairly unique position, though it has been pretty difficult, I think. What's your assessment?
I think that's right, Chris. And I mean, keep in mind, I believe that she was sworn into office maybe 2-3 days before January 6th. So she was a very new congresswoman when she witnessed the sacking of the Capitol by these pro-Trump forces, and had to essentially figure out how is she going to respond. And I don't pretend to have any special insight into what was going on inside her mind at the time, but I did interview her the day after January 6th. And she said that she was appalled by what she witnessed and that she thought it was going to be a necessary inflection point for the party, that it was time to rebuild, and that what happened at the Capitol and the way that President Trump had stoked the attack on the Capitol had essentially wiped out his legacy, all of the policies that she supported. Since then, I think it's important to point out the leaders of her party and many of the rank and file members moved away from that initial rage that they felt after January 6th to support President Trump, or at the very least to just try as hard as they possibly could not to talk about what happened that day. And so I think she found herself caught off guard as a new member of Congress, genuinely outraged by what she experienced, and then suddenly finding herself kind of alone on an island, thinking that other members of her party were going to make similar comments that it was time to rebuild.
What struck me about that video, so Trump has now entered a primary and endorsed her opponent. You know, that video with her outside Trump Tower, it reminded me of the Jeff Sessions campaign in that primary in Alabama, where you had a situation in which Trump hated Sessions because Sessions had been insufficiently obedient in using the Department of Justice to Donald Trump's ends. He held that grudge. Sessions is running in a Republican primary in Alabama where Donald Trump's very popular, and he keeps trying to go around being like, well, I love Donald Trump, even if he doesn't love me. I love him, and that's what matters. It doesn't work that way. I mean, I think Tommy Tuberville is now the senator from Alabama, as we all learned. Nancy Mace can cut those videos. This is the crux of the thing. You can't tell people how much you love Donald Trump in a Republican primary if he's out there saying, I hate your guts.
Well, to your earlier point, Chris, I think she really is trying to find a middle ground here. What was interesting to me, as much as what she did say in the video, was what she didn't say. She didn't talk about a stolen election. She did not talk about President Trump's election integrity efforts, as he's framed them. She said, I supported his policies. And she used a lot of past tense, if you notice. And then she jumped very quickly into saying, I'm the person that is going to be able to keep this seat in Republican hands come the midterms. She didn't actually stop to say any of the talking points that we currently have been hearing that President Trump really would have wanted to hear from her around a stolen election, or that what happened on January 6th was fine or carried out by patriots. And so that omission was actually just as interesting to me as what she did say.
It's a really good point. It's going to be a very interesting primary to watch in that district with Trump now inserting himself as a kind of a test. Katie Edmondson, thanks so much.